Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's work session, Raleigh City Council. Great to see everybody in person. First, we're going to start with a report on the from the Convention and Visitors Bureau and the city on the Convention Center Hotel. Something we started, as you may recall, before COVID, and now we're revisiting. So take it away.
Great. Mayor, members of council, good afternoon and welcome to today's work session. As the mayor mentioned, today we really want to partner with the CVB and JLL to update you on the refresh of the Destination Strategic Plan and on the proposed hotel to support the Raleigh Convention Center in downtown. A lot to go over today, so let me jump right in. So, as the mayor mentioned, there's been a lot of conversation about a hotel in the downtown to support the convention center. Council has been very supportive of the hotel in the past, and we've done several studies through the years that show the need for additional hotel rooms, not only to support the possible future expansion of the convention center, but to support existing operations for the convention center. It was about 6 months ago that city staff, along with the Convention and Visitors Bureau, provided you all with an update of travel and tourism in Raleigh, the impact of COVID on tourism and the hospitality businesses, talked a lot about the impact on the hospitality taxes as well. It was at that time that staff mentioned the desire to partner with the CVB and refresh that section of the Destination Strategic Plan that focused on the convention center. So just as a reminder, the Convention and Visitors Bureau did work with JLL to complete the Destination Strategic Plan back in 2018. Obviously, a lot has occurred nationally and with COVID and in the local market on travel and tourism. So we felt the refresh was important. As a reminder, too, it was not to refresh the total DSP, but just that convention center section. And at that time in 2018, JLL recommended three things. One, that we should look at business optimization at the convention center. How can we make sure that we're bringing those top priority conferences and conventions to the Raleigh Convention Center? The second thing, they recommended additional hotel rooms. And the final recommendation in the Destination Strategic Plan was for the city to consider expansion of the Raleigh Convention Center. So we worked with the CVB, who contracted with JLL and worked on the refresh over the past several months. So just to go back and remind you on the progress on the hotel. So as the mayor mentioned, a lot of good discussion, and council supported releasing an RFI, a request for interest proposal, back on January 27th of 2020. If you remember, that RFI really focused on the two vacant lots, the parking lots in front of the Performing Arts Center, and proposed two towers, one being the hotel tower, the other being a mixed-use tower. And the RFI really provided a lot of flexibility to give the developers a chance to show us how they would handle the project and get their creativity. It did stipulate that the hotel needed to be a 500-plus room hotel, and that was recommended by JLL, and it needed to be a full-service hotel. The other tower, it was open for mixed use. It talked about Class A headquarters office, but it also talked about residential and retail. That RFI was marketed locally to developers, but was also marketed nationally. If you remember, the RFI also included $30 million in planned infrastructure support, a public-private partnership from the interlocal taxes, and that was scheduled for next year, FY23. And that 30 million was left, it was suggested for parking, but it was also left flexible so we could negotiate with the selected developer. As the mayor said, things were going great. A lot of interest, a lot of momentum. You're going to hear more about that from JLL in a minute. But unfortunately, March hit, and with COVID and the uncertainties and the impact on travel and tourism, we had to cancel the RFI process. So just a reminder, as I said, it was, this is a view that's at the very bottom of the screen, the roof of the Performing Arts Center looking down Fayetteville Street. And as I said, it was the two lots right in front of the Performing Arts Center, which I've said before are our flagship lots or oceanfront property that the city owns. The plan was for the lot on the left to be the hotel site because it's closest to the convention center, and the lot on the right to be the office mixed-use site. The property is already zoned 40 acres, and both lots are about 1 acre each. You can see the 0.5 acres in the center. Council has already reserved that to remain right-of-way, whether it's for future extension of Fayetteville Street or to remain some type of pedestrian corridor. As I said, this was sent out, advertised, heard a lot of positive things, and the way we detailed the process, the RFI was just the first step of the process. We thought we would get a lot of interest. The thought was then to work with council, shortlist those responses, and then develop a more specific RFP that includes council directions and goals. We never got to that step in the process. So where are we now? JLL has completed the Destination Strategic Plan refresh, and they're here today to provide council an update. You will remember that back in the summer of 2020, we reviewed the impacts of COVID, and we saw the model for the hospitality tax just simply couldn't support all the projects, including the 30 million that was planned for hotel infrastructure, and there was 230 million that was planned in the model for the expansion of the convention center. So what we had to do was revise that. We brought that back in the 22nd Amendment, and both those projects were pushed back for 2 years. So still in the model, but you can see now the hotel funding is FY25, and the expansion is FY30. With that, let me bring up and introduce Denny Edwards. Denny is President and CEO of the Raleigh Convention Bureau. Yes, ma'am.
Before Jenny begins, I have a question for you. Do we have an updated appraisal on the value of lots A and B?
We have not done an updated appraisal. In fact, we've worked with real estate and asked that we pursue that as part of this process if council is good with us moving forward.
I would like to see that as soon as possible.
Sure. Thank you. I'll be back at the end to discuss recommendations and welcome that input from council. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jim. Good afternoon. Again, Denny Edwards with the Greater Raleigh Convention and Visitors Bureau. And as a reminder, as Jim said, in 2017, the Greater Raleigh Convention and Visitors Bureau funded a Wake County Destination Strategic Plan, which was a highly intensive 13-month project led by Jones Lang LaSalle. The goal is to identify opportunities to increase annual visitation to Wake County by 5.2 million visitors by 2028. The study garnered incredible qualitative and quantitative input from over 2,000 stakeholders, clients, visitors, municipal, academic, and corporate leaders from throughout Wake County. The DSP was released and the execution of the plan began in August of 2018. The plan identified 8 pillars The plan identified 8 pillars of opportunities for us as a community to consider, including recommendations of projects funded by the interlocal funds that would have the most significant impact on visitation. There were 4 top priority projects in the DSP 2028 identified and recommended for investment that would generate the highest overnight visitation and direct economic impact. And they included the 500-room full-service hotel, a future expansion of the convention center, enhancements at the arena, as well as an indoor sports complex. In August of 2019, the Raleigh City Council and the Wake County Commissioners approved the 21st Amendment to the interlocal agreement that included funding for all 4 infrastructure projects. Unfortunately, due to the impact of COVID, the 22nd Amendment was approved by both bodies in March 20, which included delaying funding for the Convention Hotel and the Raleigh Convention Center expansion for 2 years. With the 2-year mark approaching, in October 21, as directed by the Raleigh City Council, the GRCVB partnered with the City of Raleigh to retain JLL to conduct a refresh of the meetings and convention priorities of the DSP. The purpose of the refresh assessment was to evaluate the progress the sales teams have done to, as recommended by JLL regarding bookings at the convention center. What changes COVID had on the landscape and the meetings and conventions industry, reevaluate and validate the need for a full-service convention hotel, the size, location, client demand and needs, alternative funding sources, as well as interest from the development community. We also wanted them to review what our competitors are doing in regards to convention and convention center development and reassess the planned or lack of planned hotel development near the convention center. To ensure that this was a very inclusive and transparent process, we formed a steering committee with representatives from key organizations who would have input and provide guidance throughout the process, including many of our hoteliers from around the county. You're going to hear the results quickly soon from Dan. However, I want to share with you some good news on the recovery of our industry and the impact on the interlocal funds. In March of 21, the Wake County Hospitality Tax Review Committee projected we would not return to 19 levels until fiscal year 25. The committee met last month and analyzed pre-pandemic growth and industry trends, pace of recovery, consumer travel confidence, national research and forecasts, as well as future bookings for meetings, conventions, and sporting events. The good news is, based on a quicker than expected recovery, the committee has revised the forecast and now projects we should exceed 19 collections in fiscal year 22 by over $3.1 million. Therefore, we are in a much better financial position than we anticipated we would be a year ago. When the 22nd Amendment was approved in 21, the hospitality revenues were projected to be off by $271 million over the life of the model, which is fiscal year 19 through 34. Based on the current positive recovery numbers, city and county staff expects the revenues in the same period to rebound by $183 million. Even with the anticipated rebound, revenues are still below pre-COVID level over the life of the model by $88 million when the 21st Amendment was approved. Of the $88 million, lost revenue of $31 million occurred in fiscal year 20 and 21. So the real revenue that was lost, that's the real revenue that was lost during the pandemic. The remaining anticipated lost revenue was spread through fiscal year 34. Now, I would like to introduce Dan Fenton, Executive Vice President and Director of Global Tourism and Destination Development Services with JLL, to give you highlights of the refresh study. Dan?
Great. Thanks, Denny. Thanks very much for the opportunity. We're happy to be here. We're going to go through a few slides, and as we go through them, don't hesitate. If there's something we raised and you want to stop and say, can you go through that again, or make sure we are clear with our messaging here. A couple of things I want to say. We talk about JLL's plan, and I think Bethany and I would agree that it really was everybody's plan. A lot of people worked on the outcome of this. In 2018, as you can see, we conducted this optimization study, which we're going to talk about in a second, and that really created an opportunity for the internal teams to sort of think about the future of the convention center and to think about what does success look like. When you think about a convention center, sometimes people say it's about just the raw number of events. But what really came out of the process was the internal teams and ourselves all agreed it was the quality of the events that were as important as the number of events. And how do you create strategies that start to evolve the actual makeup of events at the convention center? And we're going to talk about that in a second. Again, we also looked at, as part of this process, comparable cities. So you're going to see a little bit about how do we compare to others in terms of walkable hotel rooms, convention center, to others in terms of walkable hotel rooms, convention center space. We're going to go through that, and then we're going to make some recommendations that, again, collective recommendations from all the people that have been involved. So here we talk about this notion of optimization versus maximization. When you ask a convention center operator, when you ask Maura or Rodney, who are here with us, or Carrie, and you say, what does success look like? Lots of times they'll use a term that 70% occupancy of a convention center sort of means that it means it's busy, which is a correct statement. One of the things that we studied together was, how do we get to 70% occupancy? And again, with the right business mix, how do we do that? And you'll see that, and we're going to show this in a second, that we have made progress from where we were after we finished the study and before the COVID hit. We had made progress, which we're going to talk about. This slide shows a little bit of our process. So we worked with Maura and Rodney, and Lauren is here too. We worked with them on a very extensive analysis of the space, if you will. So we went through and looked at every day, every room, how occupied those spaces were, to come up with the first analysis in terms of the center occupancy. And we refreshed this again in this phase, so you're going to see a little comparisons here. And then we also determined, what is current utilization and where are some of the pressure points. So what spaces tend to be used more than others, and what's the indication there when it comes to future expansion or even things that we're going to do to the current building. So we'll talk about that. We also spent a lot of time thinking about the current hotel inventory. And you'll see in a moment how we have sort of analyzed this, and we'll get through this. So here is the outcome of the first round of analysis. So you'll see that when we first did this, you'll see we roughly averaged 269 annual events, of which 60 of those were what we call room night generating. So they drove additional economic impact, into the community, into the downtown. About 49% of all the space was utilized, and we could clearly see that the ballrooms, for example, were utilized higher than the exhibit halls. We actually, if you remember, we made some recommendations that were followed up on. We actually were involved with actually looking at opportunities in the current building in terms of things we could do to try to optimize space. So are there renovation opportunities? Are there actually space opportunities in the current buildings? And some of that was studied, and it continues to be studied. So you'll see here that we came out with a new booking policy. That booking policy said, again, let's focus on those highest priority business, the business that has the largest number of economic impact, also delivers a great return for the convention center. We recommended, as you'll see here, some conversion of some of the space to think about that. We looked at different scenarios, which you're going to see here. And we also studied with the hotels. The hotels were very active, and they were in the refresh process, as they were in the first process, about the future hotel inventory and what were the needs. And what you're going to hear is, if you think about going to a hotelier and saying you want to add hotel rooms, just those two statements sometimes don't seem to match, because hoteliers will think, why do you want to increase supply, right? Because that's going to hinder my ability as a hotelier. You'll see that the hotels have recognized the importance of adding full-service hotel rooms near the convention center, that it actually benefits them because it gives us the ability to bring bigger groups in. So essentially, everybody wins in a scenario where we do that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So then what we did is we then said, okay, where are we? Where were we after the study was done? We looked at the next 2 years and said, how have we progressed? So this is pre-COVID. Here's the good news. We went from a 49% overall utilization to 53%. You'll see this on the slide. We also moved in terms of overall utilization. But the biggest thing that also was important was the types of events, and you're going to see in a second, we clearly saw shifts in terms of the types of events that were beginning to be brought into the building versus what was happening in the past prior to the work that all of us did together on the initial study. If you look at this pie chart, what this is designed to show you is a little bit of a visual here. So if you see the left-hand pie chart here, this is based on the number of events in the convention center when we did the first study. So if you look at the big blue, chunk here that says priority 5, what priority 5 really means is essentially smaller pieces of business. You never want to use the word lower quality. I'm sure they're all great pieces, but they have much less impact. And they were a major user, if you will, of the convention center. And then if you go to the far right, when we looked at this again, you'll see how that sort of dark blue area is now smaller. And you'll see how the priority 1 and 2 areas are larger. Which what this signifies is even in the 2 years after we had finished the study and all the teams that you see here today have worked together, we've been able to move that mix of business forward. Right? Now, the goal of the refresh was to say, we've gone through COVID, we've had these sort of things happen to us, where do we see the future? But I think for the council, this is an important thing to see because, in fact, and I think Maura would agree here, if you look at the before and after, we may actually have had less events in total, but higher quality. So that when the council asked the convention center team, how are we doing? The question is not so much how many did we do, but what was the mix? What was the mix of priority 1 business what's the goal for the next few years versus where we were before? Because you could have a convention center that had 500 or 600 events and they theoretically could be essentially lower quality events in terms of their impact. Yes?
I'm sorry, I missed that. Define quality again.
We have give you an example. It's number of hotel rooms that they generate, the revenue that is generated for the convention center. So it's the total impact of the event is sort of how we typically view that. And we have broken that down. We don't have it today. We can absolutely show you. There is a booking strategy that has a definition of all these priorities. And you can see in future reporting, how are we doing with moving those priorities? And what you're going to see in a second is there are literally sales strategies for almost each one in terms of how we're going to bring new business to essentially Wake County / Raleigh. How do we do that as a sales team? And we're going to talk about that. Yep.
So for fiscal year 20 on the last slide. So when we say priority 1 is 17%, does that mean that 17% of the revenues came from priority 1? Is that
No, it means that 17% of the total number of events were priority 1 events, right?
Okay.
So if you look at 17, when we were here before, we were all working together, you see how it's 6%, right? So we have moved from 6% of the total number of events being priority 1 to 17, right?
Okay.
And what we did, council members, we also tried to create a multiple year, which you'll see in a second, like a multiple year plan for, what is that optimal number of priority 1 events we're trying to have convene every year at the center.
Do you have an analysis showing for priority 1, 2, and so forth, what their contribution is to revenues?
We do. We do. We don't have it today, but we do. We can show you that,
Okay,
right?
thank
We
you.
also have data on how it contributes from an economic impact standpoint, too.
That would be good.
So both, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So this sort of, Councilmember, speaks a little bit to the future years question. So here's what we also looked at together. We said, what is currently, if you will, on the books or tentatively ready to go on the books for future years? So you can see that if you look at, for example, 21, 22, 23, just back to your point, this is, by the way, completely, this slide is focused on priority 1s. So you can see. So you can see how many priority 1s do we, this is the dark red, right? How many new bookings and also definites do we have sort of on the books for the next few years? And let me show you one other part about this slide which is important. If you go to 23 and 24 and you go to the top of those bars, you'll see the number of events is 20. So just to give you an example, Councilmember Cox, just to continue with your question, we together, the full team, came up with the notion that if we have 20 P1s on an annual basis, so these are large groups in the building, and remember there's all sorts of other events here, but if you start there, we believe we're at an optimized point at that standpoint. We think we have an optimized point if we've got 20 of those P1s that are convening annually. It's an aspirational goal. We're certainly not there today, but I'll show you a little bit in a second about how we plan on getting there. Go to the next slide. This really speaks to this. So after we did this work, we determined what is it going to take. So you've got to think about sales activity here. So we actually looked at the math of how, if we're going to get to 20 P1s every year, what is it going to take? And if you look at that highlighted number of 1,140 new priority one prospects, what that says to our sales leaders is we have to be working that number of prospects for us to ultimately hit those numbers. And there's a lot behind this on conversion rates and all those sort of things. But just think about sales activity. So when Lauren or Maura are reporting out, you're going to see them report out on how are we doing towards achieving our prospecting goals. So we can see, from a council perspective, from a sort of stakeholder perspective, it's designed so everybody can see how we're doing when it comes to sort of sales activity. Next slide here. So here's another
question on multi-year contracts. Is that, to be a priority one, does it have to be a multi-year contract?
No. Could be single year. The key is that it fits that, it has those characteristics in terms of spending and economic impact in that piece, but could be a singular year, right? Okay. Lost business. So here's an important thing. So part of what we also did is we re-looked at what were some of the reasons for business being lost. Here's a key thing. If you look at that dark red area, 45% of the lost business that we show right now, and this is a significant amount of groups that we analyzed, are due to hotel package. Important clarification, this isn't hotel rate, this is hotel inventory. So the client was saying, we're comfortable with the rates, but we need more inventory if we're going to be able to, if we're going to convert. And if you look at the right-hand number there, and you say, well, what did that equate to? Roughly 181,000 room nights we were not able to convert, and that translates in terms of the groups that we're talking about to about 102 plus million in direct spending into Raleigh. And this is direct, when we say direct spending, this is specifically people going to dinner, people doing the things that they do. This is what this accounts for. So when you think about the impact of downtown, and we had a great, the downtown leadership was on our steering committee, they looked at this and said, yeah, this is an important thing to make sure we're clear on, is how impactful the higher priority business is for downtown.
Question on that
Yeah,
slide,
absolutely.
if I may, please. The lost business because of geographic location, is that about where the convention center is or where Raleigh is?
A couple things could happen there. One could be they're trying to determine where in the country, they want to do it. We're making a pitch and they make a determination that they're going to do it east or they're not going to do it. So it could be that, right? That's a big one, right? You'll notice there's geographic location and there's geographic rotation. Sometimes we will go after a piece of business and the planner says, this year we're going to go west, right? We didn't necessarily know that in the sales process, but of course what we do in that situation is say, hey, when you come back east a little bit or when you come into this area, don't forget us. So that's what happens there, is those situations, right? Okay. Couple of things. So the question of how do we compare to others? The best way to look at this slide is you can see the names of the cities down below. And if you look at that sort of dotted line there that says 2465 with average number of hotel rooms within walking distance and comparable, Bethany and I and Mitch have done a lot of work with meeting planner surveys on this notion of walkability. So the question is, what do meeting planners think walkability means? Like what are they willing to have an attendee, what distance are they willing to have an attendee walk in terms of being competitive with another destination? What planners say to us is a quarter mile or 3 blocks, right? So once you get past that, you start to lose competitiveness, right?
I'm sorry,
Okay.
that is ridiculous.
Okay, well, this is what they say to us. We're not saying people shouldn't walk more, by the way, but this is how the industry will tend to compare one destination to another, right? So then what we did is we said, okay, well, let's look at how many, using that criteria, how many walkable rooms do we have compared to others? So you can sort of see how we stack up in terms of where we are. We have about 929 that are in that walkable sort of radius, right? And then you'll sort of see how it goes up from there. So the important piece here is thinking about this from a standpoint of, again, the industry and competitiveness. So let's say we're bidding against, one of these cities, and they need X amount of rooms on peak. They need a total of, let's say, 1,500 rooms, whatever they need. We're going to be coming back to that planner with maybe 6 or 7 or 8 hotels, some of which may not be in this what they consider walkable radius, and then we're less competitive to another destination.
I was just pointing out that whether we think it's ridiculous or not, I mean, it's quite embarrassing that like Austin has 4,300 walkable hotel rooms. The average is 2,400. We have 930. And I say it's embarrassing because we have how many empty surface parking lots surround that convention center? I mean, there's a ton on all sides, including the 2 that we own. And so I hope we can make some progress on that.
Yeah. So just a couple of quick conclusions that we talked about. One, again, we just talked about the importance of hotel package when it comes to lost business. The fact that comparable centers are both improving their hotel packages and they're adding space. So one of the things we talked about as we were all working together was, here's where we are today. Let's make sure we don't sort of lose ground going forward, and how do we have a strategy that keeps us competitive and keeps us moving forward. Again, comparable cities have 65% more hotel inventory in that core area than we do. So our recommendation is we need to figure out, as we talked about in the initial study, how do we move the hotel inventory forward? So what are the ways we can increase hotel inventory and move this from a disadvantage to an advantage, right? Couple of things here. JLL does a lot of work in the kind of public-private area. This is a slide that just talks about things that we have seen in other destinations related to how sometimes convention hotel sort of deals, if you will, or financing is put together, financial support, sometimes land is contributed, sometimes parking can be done, sometimes there's tax increment financing, infrastructure. These are just some things that would be considered or should be considered, if possible, in our state in terms of opportunities or options, in terms of how we might put a deal together with a potential partner. So a couple of things just to wrap up here. One, progress on optimization. So we've made good progress. You saw some of the data. I think Lauren and Maura would both agree that there's a lot of work still to be done when it comes to the sales activity and driving that activity. So it's still a very aggressive goal to get ourselves to that 20 P1s per year piece that we're still striving for, and there's a lot of work on that. Second is the hotel capacity, again, has been confirmed that there's a need there, that we need to figure out the best strategy towards doing that. These are some of the things that we've talked about. And the last thing is, as we think about this, the continued thought around the sort of trends that will drive the convention center expansion and things that we should consider as we think about this going forward. So how do we look at all this sort of in parallel in terms of our strategy as we think about the future together? So we really have 2 recommendations. One is restart the RFI process, excuse me. That was a big change. It's an RFI process, not an RFP process, right? Everybody remembers this, that when we did this before, so this is, of course, pre-COVID, we spent a lot of time in the market. We actually went to a couple of real estate conferences as part of this. There was significant amount of interest, in our market. We were clear, and these were high quality, both local and national developers that were interested. We have gone out informally, right, and tested this again as part of this. We believe there is continued interest in this market from those from the national and local developers. Also, we want to confirm, Councilmember Mellon, you talked about sites. We want to confirm the site options. I mean, what's the best strategy there, right? So that's one of our recommendations. And the other is, in sort of parallel track here, continue to think about trends that are going to ultimately drive the thinking around the expansion. So what are those things we got to make sure we're considering, and continuing to think about current building and future buildings sort of going forward. So I'm going to stop there for a moment and be back to answer questions and turn it back to Jim. But hopefully, hopefully this was helpful in terms of trying to get a sense of what does success look like and what we sort of think about.
Before you step
Could you go
away, can I
back-
ask a question?
Oh, could you go back 2 slides, please?
Sure.
Okay, so, no, next one. So financial support, you're looking at cash. Land contributed, which is why I want to see an appraisal on that property.
Okay.
Parking, a TIG, infrastructure development, what have other communities done in terms of incentives?
Well, these are.
All of the above?
Well,
One or
not
two?
necessarily. There could be different combinations.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
ones are the most often used?
Land is often used. So land is usually a part of it. I'll tell you this, we've done a lot of these. Financial support, important, but if you think about it, when you work with a developer, it's sort of the total deal. So it's how can we put a total deal together that, works for everybody, right? Infrastructure, there are times, depending on the site, where that can be important from a public sector perspective, but also supports the private sector in terms of bringing infrastructure to the site or things that are needed there. And tax increment, that piece was probably one of the less used, but it can be used, right? Because it typically, as you know, ties to sometimes a larger development, but it can be used. And then this idea of public spaces, sometimes destinations and cities they'll look at the meeting space and they'll say, it's still, by the way, kind of a cash investment, but the strategy is, we actually want you to have more meeting space than you might normally have, because we see it as part of the overall package, so we want to somehow support that. So those are some of the different things that we've seen.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Fort?
Yes, looking at your slide on comparable centers and supporting hotel inventory, I noticed everything was out of state. By any chance, did you do any analysis or get any data related to Charlotte?
We have that, yeah. And I will say this, Charlotte has a little bit larger walkable inventory than we do, right? But we can put that up there, so we can show you that comparison. Yeah.
Councilmember Cox?
You got to remember the microphone. So in the appendix on the presentation, there's a slide about hotel occupancy tax, and I noted that we have the third lowest occupancy tax. And so it seems to me we have ambitious plans for the convention center. So I guess the question in my mind isn't if we should increase the hotel occupancy tax, but rather when should we increase it and by how much?
Right.
Because according to the slide, our occupancy tax is at 6%. Pittsburgh is at 7%, but then when we go to Austin, Salt Lake City, and Seattle, they're looking at 11% to nearly 16%. So we really are quite low.
Yeah.
Now, we don't want to increase the tax so much to disadvantage ourselves, but
Yeah.
it seems to me that there is opportunity for growth so that we can get additional revenues in order to achieve our goals.
Yeah, and just to add, Councilmember Cox, I think that would definitely be part of that study, a part of what are the different components, and could that be one of them? Sometimes when we think about that area, we think about how much is the attendee paying in total. So when you add all the fees up, and then how do we compare to others, but same point you're making.
Mr. Cox, to your point, we are disadvantaging ourselves. On the applications for that they fill out, there's nothing that asks about what the hotel occupancy tax is. So even if it was increased, that does not put us at a competitive disadvantage. Something I've talked with Denny about, this is something we would have to go to the legislature and request. I think we also have to keep in mind that when the 6% was approved, that was 25 years ago.
Right.
And it was meant to serve two functions, building PNC Arena and also building a convention center.
Yeah.
And along the way, we have used that funding for many other things. So I think, too, we have to have a discussion with the county on what our priorities are.
Yep.
And how we move this forward.
Yep.
So there are, to Councilmember Cox's point,
Yeah.
this is something we have to have a serious discussion about.
Yep.
And I just want to add to that. I noticed, I looked it up, Charlotte is 8%, but it's 6% for the county and 2% for Charlotte.
That's because Charlotte got approval from the legislature, but that extra 2.5% was for NASCAR.
Got you.
Yeah.
But Councilmember Branch, just to stay with your question, that's why if we were to, which we're happy to do, by the way, sort of compare others, you really want to look at that total amount,
Right.
because in some cases there could be other fees that have been put into the mix when we think about comparison. But absolutely, that's because there may be, in some cities, the base tax could be 6%, but by the time you add everything, you could be at 11, 12, 13%. So it's sort of looking at that.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? I do have one comment.
You okay?
Any other questions from the team? Okay, so my comment really involves what we originally proposed.
Yep.
One was the convention center hotel.
Yep.
The other was office, residential,
Yep.
mixed use. I think the one thing that I have learned during COVID is that we depend way too much on our businesses to
Yep.
populate downtown, bring customers to our restaurants, whatnot, especially that end of downtown.
Yep.
We do not have enough people living there.
Yep.
I was talking to Bill King about this from DRA. He said, if you want to walk your dog in that area around 8 o'clock at night, it's a little scary. What I would suggest is instead of looking at office for Site B, we say, let's focus on residential and retail, because I think bringing more people to that area will create more permanent residents, will create a better sense of security, but also bring customers on a regular basis to businesses that locate there. That's my feedback. I don't know how you all might feel about that.
No, I would agree. I think in conjunction with some of the work that I know Shaw University is looking to do,
Yeah.
I think with the news of the new the Teacher Association and their building, I think all of this coming together is perfect timing and will fit, in bringing that up in that development overall.
Yeah, I agree. I think one thing we've seen is Fayetteville Street corridor. We can't depend on just office and government to keep. If we want that to be a thriving, 24-hour neighborhood, we need more residential down there, and the more residential will support more services, goods and services. So I totally support that.
Is there a consensus on that? Because we're providing some direction to staff. Okay, I see consensus on that. So I think when we're reframing this RFI, looking at that will be important. My next question has to do with incentives. So when the RFI is sent out, are we going to include what the incentives are, or are we going to wait and then negotiate incentives?
One of the things that we sort of like about the RFI process is it also gives the developers a chance to also give input. So I think, Madam Mayor, I think we would not want to prescribe in a way and try to leave that dialogue open.
That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
And then the only other thing I would say to you, back to the whole development, is we found in the first round that some developers were very interested in the fact that there was multi-use. So I think it helps us to be able to present opportunities like that to them.
Okay. And the third thing I wanted to say is, rather than a thoroughfare going through there, I would prefer pedestrian, making downtown, again, more pedestrian, bike-friendly, and not just focusing on cars going through one more block. That doesn't make sense to me.
Great. I'm going to turn it back to Jim.
Mayor and Council, thank you for that feedback. Just wrapping up, these were the next steps based on the recommendations from JLL. One was for us to continue to have those conversations with county staff, evaluating the hospitality taxes. Second, to work with JLL again to refresh the RFI, continue to look for opportunities to work with our partners, CVB, the DRA, and others as we refresh the RFI. That would come back to you for your approval before it would be submitted or sent out. You can see the last bullet on that second section. In working with JLL, they estimate that if we go through the two-step process, the RFI, and then look at a smaller group to work with on an RFP process, that it could take a year or a little longer in order to select the right firm, and council would approve that. And then the final recommendation is for staff to begin working to look at the visioning for the convention center. And we think that's important not only for us to develop that vision, but also for the developers that are going to be investing in these projects. So don't need approval on these things, just wanting to make sure council is okay with us moving forward and any other input on how to develop these documents.
So one thing I want to mention about the convention center expansion, I've talked to a number of mayors in other communities. When they're looking at convention center expansion right now, they're phasing it. And I believe Columbus specifically, I think that was one of the mayors I spoke with, that might make more financial sense if we can phase this work as opposed to trying to do it all at once. So I'm just offering that. And Councilmember Branch?
Yeah, I have a question. When are you looking to bring back the RFI for us to approve to kick it off?
Don't have a date on that yet. This is the RFI. We got a lot of positive response on this last time. I don't think it's going to take long to update the RFI. The issue is more that first bullet, working with the county to evaluate the hospitality funds. Obviously, construction prices are increasing. We had that $30 million as the planned amount for the public-private partnership. Is that still appropriate or not? That's going to take some time.
So does that part have to be done before the RFI goes out?
Yeah, to the mayor's point about incentives, the way we developed the first RFI was, again, to allow that flexibility through negotiation.
Right.
The only thing we included was the $30 million for a public-private partnership, showing that the city and county were committed to investing in this project. But we also said that the city and county were open to discussing other incentives as appropriate by law.
So from what I've heard is that it sounds best to let them come back and see what's needed. With that being said, because what I'm really saying, my point is, I think we need to get this RFI out sooner than later. And on top of that, I think selecting a developer, I'm thinking second quarter 2023 instead of third quarter.
Yeah, and I can let Dan speak to that. We worked with him on the time frame. Our goal, based on council's interest, would be to expedite this as quickly as we can, but at the same time, these are two critical projects in our downtown, so we only get one shot. We want to do it right. We want to work with council and make sure that these projects meet your goals and expectations. So.
I just want to add, I think it makes sense to sort of separate the working with the county on the funding sources from the RFI if we're not going to be specific on the incentives. And I mean, one thing that's in this JLL recommendation is developers nationally are looking for projects. Now is the time. And it really feel like we have an opportunity to seize the moment here. And I do agree. We need to get this right, but it seems like we could get the RFI out while also concurrently working on what the incentives could be, and I don't want to miss the opportunity to keep the momentum going on this.
Understood. Let me bring Dan back up to address the time frame and the mayor's comment on convention center.
Yeah, I just want to violently agree on the convention center piece in terms of phasing. I think the other piece to think about is the current building. Sometimes if you ever seen where expansions, people talk about the new building and the old. How do we make sure in our process that the whole experience ultimately is sort of where we want it to be? So I think your point about let's think about this incrementally is absolutely right on, makes a lot of sense. I think it makes a lot of sense, period, in terms of how you think about the future. And then when it comes to the RFI, I really agree that the key thing is that what we heard from, and these are informal conversations, so what we heard from developers is, everybody's kind of itching to get back, they're itching to get going. They really believe in this market, right? So they believe in investing here. So I think that I think we really can move fairly quickly on that piece. And I think your point about while we're going through that, continue to think about what are the possibilities. Also, I think we may hear some interesting ideas from developers that we maybe hadn't thought of.
Well,
so.
that's the whole purpose of an RFI.
That's right.
Is bring us your best ideas. I mean, as you said, there are probably things out there that we haven't even dreamed of. So I liked what you said about not being prescriptive.
Right.
Because that's when I think we really limit ourselves.
Right.
And I also don't want to get caught up in the $30 million that we had set aside before. That land value has increased exponentially.
Yep.
And I think that we have to look at what we have. That is extremely valuable.
Yep.
And will be valuable to a developer.
Yep. And again, maybe, like you, there could be a whole different way to go at this that the
Right.
developers come up with.
Yep. Do you have what you need from us?
Yeah, I mean, I think more questions are great. I think we want to make sure that on the first part, just to go back to the beginning, I think that, Denny and Lauren and Maura and everybody that's here would agree. We want to keep furthering the dialogue about what success looks like. That we want the council to go, we're getting a better sense here of, this mix of business and where we're trying to go, that piece. And then when it comes to the core recommendations, I think the more input, the better. So.
Well, you've heard from us today.
Yeah.
I think one thing that I'll just emphasize is we would like to get started on this.
Great.
And we push. So
Okay.
get going.
We're with it. We're with it. We got it.
All right, thank you very much. That was a very comprehensive presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have the Midtown Corridor Municipal Service District.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of Council. I'm Mary Vigue with Budget and Management Services to present the results from the Midtown Corridor Municipal Service District Feasibility Study. As a reminder, in December of 2021, City Council directed staff to complete a study evaluating the feasibility of establishing an MSD in the Midtown Corridor area. The report includes the process of establishing an MSD, the eligibility, the impact on the community, and boundary options. The completed report has been attached to the agenda item. This slide highlights the various sections of the report. I'll be going over several of these sections in more detail today, including background information, identifying the need for additional services, the identified boundaries, and the overall process. I'd like to begin with defining what a municipal service district is. A municipal service district is a defined area within a city in which the city council authorizes a special property tax in addition to property taxes levied throughout the city. It funds extra services or projects exclusively benefiting the properties within the district. North Carolina General Statutes 160A, Article 23, regulates the establishment of municipal service districts and types of eligible services council may authorize within a district. A service district is not a separate entity. Instead, it may be used to raise money from the property owners who most directly benefit from the provision of those additional services or projects. The City of Raleigh has established 2 municipal service districts already, the Downtown MSD and the Hillsborough Street MSD. The Downtown MSD is defined as a downtown revitalization district, while Hillsborough Street is defined as an urban revitalization district. The Midtown Corridor would be defined as an urban revitalization district because the potential district satisfactorily meets the conditions that the area consists primarily of existing or redeveloping concentrations of industrial, retail, wholesale, office, or significant employment generating uses, or any combination of these. The Downtown MSD and the Hillsborough Street MSD were established following a public engagement process. City Council approved the service boundary and contracted service provision to a provider through a competitive selection process. Those services include street and sidewalk cleaning, a safety ambassador program, economic development services, project development, business retention and recruitment, marketing promotions, and hosting festivals and events. This slide highlights the Downtown MSD, whose tax rate is 4.4 cents per 100 of assessed value, and for fiscal year 22 will generate approximately $1.4 million. The city contracts with Downtown Raleigh Alliance for most services associated with the district, except for the downtown clean team that the city manages ourselves. This is a good example of where a city can choose to contract the additional services or provide it by the city themselves. This slide highlights the Hillsborough Street MSD, whose tax rate is 9.65 cents per 100 of assessed value, and for fiscal year 22 will generate approximately $792,000. The city contracts with Hillsborough Street Community Services Corporation for services associated with this district. North Carolina General Statute outlines the legal steps required to establish a new municipal service district, including components related to public engagement and the competitive selection process. As a reminder, a competitive selection process is not required if the city provides the services themselves. This slide highlights the major steps to establish a new service district. These steps do not include non-mandatory steps such as additional public engagement opportunities other than the public hearing. The green boxes highlight current progress of the completion of the feasibility report. So that's currently where we are with the process. Major milestones include the establishment of the boundaries, the notification to property owners, the public hearing, the issuance of an RFP for service provision if the city is not providing the service, and council voting to establish the district and the associated tax rate. I'll note that the tax is levied effective July 1st following the establishment of the district. No tax may be levied for part of a fiscal year. And I think my slides got out of order, so sorry, I'm going backwards. As part of the process to establish a municipal service district, City Council selects services to provide within a district to a greater extent than services provided citywide. This slide provides examples of common services provided within municipal service districts, including the downtown and Hillsborough Street MSDs. The report provides additional information on the summary of potential eligible services related to the establishment of an MSD for the Midtown district. For each category of potential services, the report will identify the current level of service provided citywide, if the additional service is provided in the downtown or Hillsborough Street MSD, the options for those additional services, and some estimated cost ranges to provide the service. Additional services may be identified through a public engagement process, and final cost estimates would be determined through that competitive selection process. Once the city has established a need to provide an enhanced level of service, a service boundary must be defined. Defining a boundary for a municipal service district is not an exact science. A district can be defined by natural borders, such as roads and interstates, or conceptual borders, such as zoning classifications as defined in citywide plans. Two potential areas for the Midtown corridor are provided for council's consideration. As part of deliberations, City Council may also direct staff to amend the perimeter of the boundaries to exclude certain land uses. However, the selected boundary must remain contiguous. City Council may also exclude certain parcels by property owner request should the parcel not need the services outlined in the proposed district. Area 1 defines the district from the North Hill Shopping Center along St. Albans to Wake Forest Road, incorporating the shopping district south of I-440 down to Crabtree Creek. I-440 is the major corridor connecting the study area. Area 1 is defined by the City of Raleigh's Planning Department in the 2020 Walkable Midtown, the Midtown St. Albans Area Plan. The map presented here and within the report shows commercial, residential, and exempt parcels. These classifications are categorizations of official land use types as defined by Wake County's Department of Tax Administration. One important thing to note, in this categorization, apartments may be defined as commercial use and shown in the table and maps as commercial use and not residential. This area has an assessed value of $1.96 billion and the incremental value of a penny, so if we tax it, a penny would be worth $179,700. Located within the report is additional information and examples of various tax rate scenarios and the potential revenue it would generate. Area 2 is similar to Area 1, but includes the industrial corridor between Bush Street and Atlantic Avenue up to New Hope Church Road. Area 2 is an expanded version of Area 1, and in addition to the concentration of public uses outlined in Area 1, Area 2 includes significant commercial industrial concentrations. This area is included in the City of Raleigh's economic development priority areas. Again, the map presented here and within the report shows commercial, residential, and exempt parcels. This area has an assessed value of $2.1 billion, and the incremental value of a penny is $190,900. Located within the report is additional information and examples of the various tax rate scenarios and the potential revenues that it would generate. So in summary, this slide just provides an overview of the assessed value, the taxable value, and the value that a penny would generate if it was levied. Staff is available to answer any questions that council may have. Thank you.
Councilmember Buffkin?
So I just had one question, and I think maybe this was just because it was a summary report and high level. I didn't see the category of urban revitalization or urban renewal projects in the category for capital investments. I know that's in the statute. I can't remember exactly what it was, which term was used, but I just wanted to make sure we were still looking at that option.
Yeah, and I believe it categorized in there, and it could be I just didn't highlight it in there.
Okay, fair enough. So I know we're running short on time today, so I might just suggest for the council that a decision on the merits is a little premature. I've made a commitment to some of the people who'd be most directly impacted to continue talking with them about important parts of this, including the tax rate. So I'll be able to do that in the next few weeks, but to keep this on track for potentially doing it before July 1. I'd like to see if staff couldn't bring us an agenda item for the April 5th meeting to set a public hearing for May 17. And I think that'll allow us enough time to do some engagement, get the required public notices out. I do today have a strong feeling that the second boundary line option is the better one. Primarily because there's a large brownfield site at the corner of New Hope and Atlantic that I think would be a great opportunity for this to potentially be funded as some kind of urban renewal. It's also adjacent to the S line, so there's a lot that's attractive there. But as far as the rate, I couldn't give you a good feel today about how the community would react, but committed to doing that work and bringing some information back, and anybody who wants to join those conversations, you are certainly welcome to do so.
Okay, Councilmember Cox?
So the revenue that would come in is like $180,000 to $190,000 per year, correct?
And that's based on a penny levied, so it would depend on what the established tax rate would be for the district, because it could be whatever council sets it at.
As you do your additional analysis, can you bring back how that money would be spent? Because I'm thinking in terms of if you're going to hire an executive director for the municipal district, I mean, you're going to eat up a large chunk of that money. So the question is, if we're talking about renovating a brownfield site, which could cost millions,
So the services are actually determined by city council and by what areas you would like to see in this district based on feedback that you receive. Based on that, unless we're providing the services, it's an RFP that is issued to provide those services in the district. And so, much like we do with DRA and Hillsborough Corporation, they would submit a proposal to us on what that cost would be to provide the service. So the tax rate doesn't determine how much that is. That doesn't determine the tax rate. Council determines the services they'd like to provide, and based on that, and estimates what that tax rate would look like.
Okay, so the tax rate could be considerably higher than the penny.
Yeah, the penny, and then the report itself actually outlines other options in addition to the penny. The penny is just the starting place, simple math of if you wanted to do, say if $1 million is your goal, how many pennies that would need to be.
Right, and we need that analysis. So we need to understand, okay, what services are we going to provide? Are we going to rehabilitate brownfield sites that are chemically contaminated? And so what's that expense going to be, and what will
Well,
the
that's
tax be?
part of the feedback that we would actually seek from City Council in April to move forward along with what those boundaries would be to set the public hearing.
Okay, but the public hearing would be, and then there's an up or down vote on whether or not we're going to adopt the municipal service district and whether or not we're going to adopt the tax. And my concern is we're not doing the analysis, or we need to do the analysis of how we're going to spend that money. And I'm not hearing that discussion.
I had Councilmember Knight next, and then Councilmember Buffkin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just real quickly, and with this being partially, would be partially in my district, I'm supportive of moving forward with the process. The timing, I certainly want to work closely with the Midtown Alliance, which will do a lot of work in this regard to build the support in that area. But I do think this is something that I think would be beneficial to that area of the city, and I'm supportive of moving forward with this process. And I think we'll come up with that information as we move through the process of what exactly such a district would look like.
Councilmember Buffkin.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for those comments, Mr. Knight, and your questions, Mr. Cox. Those are good questions. Those questions I think will be answered in due time. I only mentioned the brownfield site as relevant to the boundary, in that I think it supports option 2 as the better option. As far as how the money's spent, and again, this is more on the kind of the substantive side of this whole project, which today I'm just more focused on the process and keeping it moving along. So we have the option. We may not decide to take the option, but I'd like to keep the option open that we get it done before July 1 so it can start taking into effect. But I can tell you today, as originally envisioned and what I've heard from the community, and I said in December when I brought this item to council, this MSD is going to be different. It's going to be different because Midtown has different needs than downtown and Hillsborough Street or even Blue Ridge. That conversation's still going on. And all of that leads me to just one category of investments. That's capital improvements. When you look at Midtown and you understand that the owners, the landlords in the Midtown area are doing a great job with promoting business investment, keeping the streets clean and safe. The need for Midtown is, again, different than downtown and Hillsborough Street. It's more in that capital investment category. And so I don't even know that there would be an executive director of this MSD. I think, in conversations with the staff, they said that, this could be run out of city staff and manage those capital investments. And that is really at least for me, the sole focus of this municipal service district effort. But again, that's a little bit ahead of time, and lots of work and conversations need to happen to confirm that view and figure out what the right rate is in that analysis you were just referring to. So I think that work can be accomplished in the 6 weeks we have before the public hearing, and I'd be grateful if we could just keep this moving along procedurally while that engagement effort was going on. So, thank you.
Councilmember Stewart, Mayor Pro Tem Stewart. Sorry.
Councilmember Branch, were you?
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry, I thought you had your hand up for a while.
I did, but go ahead.
Okay. I have some concerns. Initially looking just at this proposal, and we're talking about, Councilmember Buffkin, you were mentioning capital investments, noting that a penny is less than 200,000. Did I get that right? I think it's going to be really hard to justify doing an MSD to get capital investments for this area in a way that would make any dent into those capital investments. So from that perspective, I have some concerns. And then from the perspective of the entire city, I have some concerns of if we do it here, where else are we going to do it? And then if we're going to continue to do new MSDs throughout the city, where do we not do MSDs? And where does that leave us? And so I'm okay with you going and having continued conversations with the business leaders you've been talking with about here's what we learned from staff and here's where we're at. I am not in favor of predicting a public hearing timeline yet. There's still a lot of steps to get to that. I understand the concern with wanting to play this out for a 2023 budget, but I have some serious concerns about moving forward, and so I'm not comfortable setting when that would come back to us and setting a public hearing at this time.
Councilmember Branch.
Yes, so I've looked online and I'm trying to find for the Blue Ridge MSD, where are we with that? Did we decide not to do it, or is that study still out? Like, I'm trying to find information and there's nothing there. And the reason I'm asking, because that preceded this one.
Blue Ridge is incorporated in Hillsborough Street, so that's who runs it.
Two separate entities,
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah, but it's not an official MSD yet.
So I'm Tansy Hayward, Deputy City Manager, and I represent the city on the Blue Ridge Corridor Alliance Board. The council did previously receive a similar feasibility report for a requested MSD in the Blue Ridge Corridor. I think the council deferred any action for more engagement and community dialogue in the Blue Ridge Corridor area. There has been recent activity by the Blue Ridge Corridor Alliance. They have independently funded an outreach effort to get formal feedback from the community about interest in a MSD, what those services and what the tolerance for a tax rate would be. So I think at this point, the city is waiting on additional steps by the Blue Ridge Corridor Alliance, and I don't believe that those actions would be timely enough for consideration in the next budget cycle.
Which leads me to my next question is, and Councilman Buffkin, you may have this information, the Midtown Alliance, have they done similar?
Well, first off, I think we're making an assumption there that the Midtown Raleigh Alliance would, there has to be, if we do this, there has to be an RFP process. So let's not make that assumption quite yet, that they would be the organization
let me rephrase
body.
my question. My question is, have residents formed a group to look at them forming a MSD, our businesses?
So it's the short answer is this is a little different. In the Midtown area, you've got a very small group of people who own or control the properties that would be impacted. I've just learned today, like the rest of you, that there's a very small number of residential property owners that would be impacted. The dynamics of dealing with a large group of people like that, it's pretty easy for me to convene the small group of large landowners, but without having the public hearing and the formal notice and the engagement process that would go along with it, it's going to be very difficult for me to convene the group of other people that are impacted. So that's why I'd like to keep it moving forward so that work can happen and we can keep the possibility of doing this on July 1.
So let me just try to provide some clarity, and Mary, jump in. Councilmember Buffkin, I think that is a very ambitious goal. Quite frankly, I think to meet the statutory requirements, there are a lot of things behind the scenes that have to take place, and notifications of meetings and engagement with all of the impacted and potentially impacted property owners. July 1 will probably be very difficult to manage, just trying to manage expectations here. And based on today's dialogue, I think probably from staff, if we could come back with a projected timeline of what the process would look like. We will continue to work and do the analysis that Councilmember Cox referenced to keep the ball moving so that we would not lose momentum, but to bring back a realistic timeline. Because I don't want it, we talked about setting a public hearing date today. We're not really close to that yet. So
could I make a suggestion that I think, thinking of some of the concerns expressed, could we send this to committee, say Vibrant and Healthy Community Committee, and have a discussion, bring in, like, invite residents, invite the business community, have that discussion, and then look at that analysis, and then help move that forward? And then we could also consider a timeline.
So just to be clear, I didn't mean to propose to set a public hearing today. We just need an agenda item to do that at some point. But, you know, my only concern with going to committee is the timeline. And, you know, if we can knock it out this month and come back to council on April 5th, that would keep us on target. But I don't know what else the committee might have had planned for this month. You know, it's an ambitious timeline. I will acknowledge that. But you know, we're Raleigh. The ambitious we can handle. The impossible takes longer. You know, I think all the pieces are in place to get the council the information that it needs to make a decision before July 1. So I'd like to keep that possibility on the table for us. How we get there, I'm flexible.
If we send this to committee, it would be the April meeting, which still keeps us on timeline.
I don't think we got a 4-week statutory notice requirement, so that means we'd be reporting out in May, and we would slip. I'm looking to the deputy city attorney who helped me with the timelines and requirements.
It's my understanding that the director of the Midtown Alliance may be speaking to us at public comment today. We may learn some things that we could then make some decisions during the council meeting today. Because that's my understanding. She is speaking with us today. Again, they're not the decision makers on this, but they're obviously going to be practically speaking, a major part of this. So we could maybe hear from her in terms of timeline process a little bit more before we make a decision. I don't know.
Can I chime in about process real quick, though?
Sure.
The importance of the July 1st is only if council chooses to authorize the tax. You can approve, I'm looking at the deputy attorney as well, you can approve the actual municipal service district at any time. So if it took longer than prior to July 1st, you could still draft it and pull it together.
Correct.
And then council, as part of the 24 budget process, could then assess the tax levy. The assessment of the tax levy is the driving force, if that's the case, for the July 1, but the actual, correct me if I'm wrong, Robin, you can establish the MSD at any time. So I'm just saying, much to the city manager's request, if it took us longer to get there than the tax levy, it could still be approved this summer or at any point by city council. The tax rate would just be established as part of the 24 budget process. So I just throw that out there just as another point of clarification. They're two separate approvals, the tax rate versus the actual establishment of the district.
Okay. Councilmember Melton.
I'll be super brief because I know my comments are standing between us and lunch. I just want to say that looking at the slide 8 with the establishing new municipal service districts, the flow chart, I'm supportive of keeping the process moving forward, but I feel like we're going way too fast. I mean, we're jumping from step 2 to 9 in a proposed only couple weeks, and I'm not comfortable with that. I would be comfortable with continuing it, moving it forward, and supporting Councilmember Bufkin in this endeavor. But I can't support setting a public hearing today, and I don't know that it needs to go to committee. I think if that work can continue to happen and it comes back another way, that would be fine too. But I want to make sure that we're doing this right.
All right, we're at a standstill.
Okay, I've heard
I'm still
you.
going to recommend that we send this to committee because I think we could do some of the neighborhood work and that type of public engagement that's going to be required. I know when we established the Hillsborough Street MSD, I'm trying to recall, but I know it took more than a year to get that done. There's a lot of controversy, especially in the residential areas. I just want to make sure that people have the opportunity to express their opinions in all ways. And I think it would be helpful for us to hear more detail. But at the same time, that gives us the opportunity to continue to move it forward.
Okay, I've heard you. Thank you all for your feedback and help on this. I would just say about that flow chart slide, because as envisioned, this one would not include a lot of those steps. You know, if we go this route of not having a service provider, we don't have RFPs and things like that. But I've heard you, council members, and happy to help you all engage in this conversation. And you know, if we need a formal vote, I'm supportive of going to the Safe, Vibrant, and Healthy Communities Committee to continue this effort. And thank you all.
Okay, we do need a vote for that. So, motion to approve. Seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that was unanimous, clerk. Thank you. All right. We will be back at 1 o'clock. 5 minutes. Mayor?